Sione Vaki is the Detroit Lions' most versatile player, a player that the Lions decided to select with the 132nd pick in the fourth round of the 2024 NFL Draft. Vaki is a player that can contribute on all three levels of the football field, that being offense, defense, and special teams, and while doing so, he does it at an extremely high level. Throughout OTAs and minicamps, Sione Vaki has been the talk of the town for many different reasons, starting off with his ability as a wide receiver, his fluidity and instincts as a running back, and just being a ball of energy on the special teams for both coverage and return teams. Vaki has been arguably the Detroit Lions' most talked about rookie throughout OTAs and minicamp, and today we're going to take a look at Vaki's versatility for the defense, versatility for the offense and special teams, and what his role could potentially be as we move into the 2024 preseason. Now, taking a look and starting off with Sione Vaki, he was the 132nd selection in the 2024 NFL Draft. The fourth round selection by the Detroit Lions was actually the second time that round that they decided to make a trade up into the fourth round for a prospect that they really liked. However, to most people's surprise, they announced Sione Vaki as a running back, despite him playing safety for a majority of his collegiate career at Utah. Now, Sione Vaki played 2 seasons with the University of Utah, and as I said, primarily played safety for them for those 2 seasons, in which he was a pretty good Pac-12 starter. He put up 92 tackles across 2 years, 12 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, an interception, 5 passes defended, as well as a forced fumble. Now, throughout Sione Vaki's sophomore season, the Utah Utes had a lot of injury concerns at the running back core, right? There were games going in where they had 1 or even 0 healthy running backs on the roster, so they had to rely on other players to kind of pick up the reins and kind of take control of that running back room, at least for the absence and for the injury duration of those current running backs that Utah was supposed to rely on. Now, Sione Vaki was one of those players, and throughout his sophomore season, played 7 games at the running back position and was really impressive for a majority of them. Sione Vaki finished his sophomore campaign with 42 carries over those 7 games with 317 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. He averaged 7.5 yards per carry in the Pac-12, which is really, really impressive. And then added on to that with 11 receptions for 203 yards and 3 more touchdowns through the air, averaging over 18 yards per reception while having 1 punt return for 16 yards on top of it. The definition of versatility, and Sione Vaki stepped up to the plate every single time he was asked to and had some really strong performances versus the likes of Washington, USC, and some of the other powerhouses in the Pac-12 a season ago. Now, Sione Vaki averaged over 7.5 yards per carry and 18.5 yards per reception, which for a D1 collegiate athlete at a Power 5 conference is really, really impressive. And I know the sample size was small with only 42 carries and 11 receptions, but comparing that to some of the other running backs that were drafted earlier in this class, it really starts to stand out just how effective and explosive Sione Vaki was a season ago for Utah. Now, comparing him to the first 3 running backs taken in this class, Jonathan Brooks, the running back from Texas, was taken by the Carolina Panthers at the top of the 2nd round, where he averaged 6.1 yards per carry and 11.4 yards per reception in his time at Texas. Now, yes, Jonathan Brooks played a lot more at Texas than Sione Vaki did at Utah. He had a lot more carries, a lot more receptions, and obviously put up better numbers overall. But as far as an efficiency standard and as far as an explosiveness per play basis, Sione Vaki was a far more explosive athlete and far better on a per touch basis. And again, even though the sample size is smaller, 42 carries and over 50 touches isn't a bad sample size for Sione Vaki to get a true look. Now, Trey Benson, the running back from Florida State, was also drafted before him, I believe, either in the late 2nd or the early 3rd. He averaged 5.8 yards per carry, as well as 11.4 yards per reception. So again, good, very good. And again, had a larger sample size than Sione Vaki, but not nearly as explosive or as efficient as a receiver or a rusher. Blake Corum, the arguably best running back in this class on paper and from a resume standpoint, only averaged 4.8 yards per carry a season ago while averaging 7.3 yards through the air. he really wasn't that explosive of an athlete. He was a consistent player. He was a player that was going to get you 3 to 4 yards every single carry and would very rarely go backwards. But the big plays weren't really there for Blake Corum either on a per play basis, averaging just 4.8 yards per carry and just 7.3 yards through the air per reception. As a receiver, he really wasn't the best receiving back. And although he was a phenomenal running back, he really didn't have the explosive plays that some of the other guys had, and didn't have a lot of the explosive plays that either Jonathan Brooks, Trey Benson, or Sione Vaki had. Now, the point of this is not to say that Sione Vaki is a better football player than those guys, right? It is not to say that Sione Vaki should have been drafted higher than Jonathan Brooks or Trey Benson or Blake Corum or any of the running backs that were drafted ahead of him in the NFL class. But it is to show that Sione Vaki, as a pretty much pure athlete at the running back position with very little training, very little time to prepare, very little coaching at the position, was still one of the most efficient and explosive running backs in college football a season ago. And despite what his 40 time might say, despite what his athleticism score might say, Sione Vaki was one of the best running backs and one of the most explosive players in the class. And I think he's going to be a really interesting player to see just how good he can be with the Detroit Lions in 2024. Now, Sione Vaki, as we've talked about, is a very versatile athlete, right? He was a finalist for the Paul Hornung Award, which is the most versatile player in college football. And it's not hard to see why. His versatility will very much translate to the NFL. And with the Detroit Lions in 2024, I think you could legitimately see him playing a lot of positions. However, primarily he will be a running back. And I see his usage being very similar to what Craig Reynolds got a season ago, which was 41 carries, 5 receptions, in which Craig Reynolds had a respectable 226 yards and a singular touchdown. Now, I think that those touches are going to be a little bit more spread out as far as maybe a few less carries and a few more targets, potentially closer to 40 carries on the season, maybe closer to 35, 40, but having close to maybe 15 to 20 receptions. So I think he'll get a little bit more work than Craig Reynolds, but I think he will get a solid running back 3 dosage of close to 50 touches a season, and I think he can produce more than 226 yards and a touchdown for the Lions. I think he will primarily take over as that third running back on the roster, and I think he'll get about 50 touches as a rookie and put up close to 3, maybe 350 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns. However, running back is not the extent of Sione Vaki's usage, as I think he will play running back. I think he will play receiver, or at least line up as a wide receiver at points. I think if depth becomes an issue, if injuries start to arise, we could potentially see Sione Vaki as an emergency safety, but I think where he's really going to shine is on the special teams early, where he's going to be a gunner on punt returns. He's going to be a coverage specialist on kickoffs. And I do think that he is going to be a returner to start his career. I actually think, in fact, that Sione Vaki is going to be a full-time kick return starter to start the 2024 season. But as I've said already, Sione Vaki has been a standout at minicamp. He's been a standout at OTAs. He's played every role and looked great at all of them. He's been a fluid receiver. He's been an instinctual running back. He's been a ball of energy on the special teams as far as coverage as well as returning. And I do think that Sione Vaki will start at kick returner for the Detroit Lions. He said in an interview recently that he really likes the new kick return rules, that he feels like it lets him kind of showcase his ability and it plays to his strengths a little bit more as a returner. I think he starts on the coverage team being in special teams ace, flying down the field on coverage reps and being a great kick returner and punt return coverage specialist. And I think he'll get a good mix of running back and wide receiver work. So despite being a 4th round selection and despite being a 3rd string running back, I think that Sione Vaki is going to have a much larger role on this offense and a much larger role on this franchise than his on paper resume may have you believe, right? I think he'll be more impactful than the typical 3rd string running back. I think he'll be more impactful than the typical coverage team guy, right? I think he'll be more impactful than the typical 4th round selection. And even though he's not going to start at running back, he's not going to start at wide receiver, he's not going to start at any offensive or defensive position, I do think the Lions found a new starting kick returner. I think they found a depth punt returner. I think they found a special teams ace that will play day one and be impactful there while rotating in and getting a solid amount of carries and a solid amount of work at both the running back and the wide receiver position. Sione Vaki is the most versatile player on the Detroit Lions roster. They will find a way to get the football in his hands, whether it be on special teams or on the offensive side of the ball. And me personally, I'm really excited to see how 33 plays and how he is able to impact the offense, because I think it will be a lot more than a lot of people believe from the outside looking in. But with all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know your opinions on Soni Vaki down in the comments below. Be very curious to hear what roles you think he'll excel in early and what roles you think he might develop into a little bit later in his career. But with all of that being said, thank you all so much for watching. If you've not done so yet, please go down below and subscribe to the channel. We are 50 subscribers away from 4,000, and we are looking to hit that goal before training camp. So if you enjoyed the Detroit Lions content, if you're still sticking around to the end of the video and you've yet to subscribe, please go down and do it. It helps the channel out a ton. And again, we're shooting for that 4,000 mark by the start of training camp in just under a month. So with that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.